Well, we've met with all kinds of people, from the Chief Minister to the Governor, to the trade unions, to business representatives, and that's all on the basis of our two inquiries. The first of which is about how international treaties are negotiated and the scrutiny that's given to them, particularly in the UK context. I know obviously that's very topical here in Gibraltar at the moment, given the ongoing negotiations, and so we're keen to know in terms of the overseas territories context as well. And our second inquiry is into the general constitutional status of the overseas territories across the board.
Whether need to ensure that treaty negotiations have wider scrutiny?
I think it's so that elected representatives can be sure that what's been negotiated on their constituents' behalf is in their best interest, to have an understanding of how a negotiation may be going, not for minute detail of every jot and tittle, but to have that reassurance upon the broad approach, and also perhaps before any treaty negotiations embarked, and perhaps having a greater scrutiny and say over the mandate that's given for that negotiation.
Well, we just had the perfect example. We had the Deputy Prime Minister accusing a senior negotiator of going over and above cabinet mandate.
Well, beyond what I've read in the press, which I never doubt at all, of course, there's very little I can add to that, apart from that there seems to be a dispute in the accounts. But I would say on a general level, it's vital that ministers have that oversight of process, but understandably at an official level, people who would be doing the nitty-gritty of negotiations, they must be mindful of the mandate which is given to them from those who are politically accountable.
Well, you've got the cabinet, you've got negotiators. Couldn't it be a question of too many cooks spoiling the broth?
That can often be the case, and more politicians is very rarely the answer, I find. But in terms of having that broad agreement about perhaps in the outline of a mandate, and making it more acceptable ultimately when Parliament does have a say at the end of the process, is it not better to have people on board at the beginning than at the end? Now, these are all ideas. We've taken a range of views from all kinds of people, not just here in Gibraltar, and we'll be crafting our report to reflect that evidence and the view of the committee.
The other side of the coin is, of course, that after Brexit, Parliament's role is further reduced in terms of the scrutiny. So, ironically, it is when you're going to have more trade deals and treaties.
Which is the entire basis of us doing the inquiry, because we accept that the previous arrangements for treaty negotiation before the UK's membership of the European Union do date back from precedents in the 1920s, and so that's the whole but that's what's given us the enthusiasm to carry out the inquiry, so that we can make recommendations, show that there isn't any void, as you allude to.
Okay, so last week you called for evidence for an inquiry into the constitutional arrangements of the overseas territories. Have you had feedback from Gibraltar?
We've not yet had official feedback, but certainly in our conversations that we've had with all the range of people we've met with, we have posed that question. I think the overall view that initially we've come away from Gibraltar with is that yes, there's very, very strong loyalty to the UK and a desire for deeper ties. The question of a Member of Parliament in the UK House of Commons for Gibraltar is always an interesting one. And I think there's a recognition that there may be a certain concern of what trade-offs might be required. But at the moment it's a very hypothetical initial response, and we're keen to, we'll be gathering evidence from different overseas territories as well, and looking at that in the round over the coming months.
I'm sure that you found already with that hypothetical initial response that not everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet.
As is always the way, and that's the purpose of getting a range of views. I would be very surprised if I found everybody in total agreement of one proposition. Rarely have I found that.
How much of a say would you think the overseas territories would actually have?
In the context of having a Member of Parliament, it would certainly be that direct representation in the House of Commons, direct access to to government ministers and so forth. I suppose it's a question I have to pose to myself as one of 650 members of Parliament. How much say do I have? Well, sometimes it's about as much noise as you might be willing to make, but also if you're there at the coalface having that ability of interacting directly, you can have more more influence than might be imagined. But as I say, I wouldn't want people to get carried away with it. This is the idea that the recommendation we're going to automatically come up with. The whole purpose of our visit is to understand the variety of views that there are.
Nobody should be putting their names down just yet.
Just yet, not just yet, although I can imagine that there might be a few interested.
But in terms of the wider, say, for the overseas territories, so that people don't think that what you're doing today is not just a paper exercise.
No, indeed, and I think this is occasionally raises its head, doesn't it, as a question. But I think you've clearly got the immediate concern about the negotiation going on. But I think the whole context of our leaving the European Union and other matters across the globe do occasionally bring to the forefront constitutional questions, and I think a reasonably regular review of them is a healthy thing.
Well, if I can take you back to that scrutiny, and as a perfect example, just how much do MPs know about the current negotiations, UK-EU negotiations over Gibraltar?
Well, I can only go off what I've been told here, and it won't surprise you to know that those directly involved have been quite tight-lipped, as was ever the case of any negotiation. I think, though, that people do feel that they've, in terms of those interested in Gibraltar, have been consulted. I think that there are certain red lines that we understand very well, particularly over sovereignty. But as with anything, members of Parliament poking around don't always find the answers that they imagine they will, and so I can understand why there's a degree of being tight-lipped at the moment, particularly as we enter what is a crucial phase of those negotiations.